The tension in the CNN studio was palpable as former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin finished her pointed critique of Representative Jasmine Crockett's policy positions. What began as a substantive debate about economic legislation had unexpectedly veered into personal territory when Palin added, "Maybe if Congresswoman Crockett spent less time on those designer outfits and flashy hairstyles and more time understanding basic economics, she'd realize why her policies are hurting everyday Americans." The studio fell silent. The moderator, visibly uncomfortable, shifted in his seat. For a moment, Representative Crockett's expression remained perfectly composed as the camera focused on her face. Then, with remarkable poise, she leaned slightly toward her microphone and delivered a response so measured yet powerful that it left everyone in the studio, crew members, producers, and even Palin herself, in stunned silence. "Governor Palin, I'm here to discuss policy solutions for American families, not to have my appearance critiqued. But since you've opened that door, let me walk through it properly." What happened next wasn't just a response to a personal attack. It was a masterclass in dignity that would resonate with millions of Americans seeking substance over spectacle in their political discourse. If you value moments when substance triumphs over personal attacks, like and subscribe to our channel for more content that highlights the power of dignified responses in today's political landscape. The CNN Special Roundtable, American Crossroads, Policy Perspectives, had been promoted for weeks as a substantive discussion featuring prominent voices from across the political spectrum. The producers had specifically structured the program to focus on policy details rather than the personal conflicts that often dominate political media. Sarah Palin, the former Alaska governor and vice presidential candidate, had maintained a significant media presence since her time in office, with her distinctive communication style and unwavering conservative positions making her a frequent guest on political programs. At 60, she remained a recognizable figure in American politics, particularly among traditional conservative audiences. Representative Jasmine Crockett, serving her second term in Congress, had established herself as a rising voice in progressive politics. With a background as a civil rights attorney before entering politics, Crockett had built a reputation for detailed policy knowledge and an ability to communicate complex issues in accessible terms. At 43, she represented a newer generation of leadership increasingly prominent in national political conversations. The roundtable, scheduled for 8 p.m. on a Wednesday evening, took place in CNN's Washington studio. The set was designed with a circular table to encourage direct engagement between participants, with 4 guest chairs arranged around a center-positioned moderator, veteran journalist, Robert Carson. Palin arrived at the studio at 7:15 p.m., accompanied by a single aide. She greeted the production staff cordially while reviewing her talking points on several handwritten note cards. Her preparation focused primarily on economic policy critiques that had resonated with her base in recent appearances. Crockett arrived at 7:20 p.m. with her legislative director, Michael Harrington. She carried a slim portfolio containing research materials and policy briefs developed by her congressional staff, particularly focused on economic impact analyses of proposed legislation. Those who observed her preparation noted her methodical review of statistical data and historical precedents relevant to the evening's discussion topics. The other participants, economist Dr. Eleanor Maxwell and former Labor Secretary Thomas Richardson, arrived shortly thereafter, completing the panel. As they were fitted with microphones and briefed on broadcast logistics, the atmosphere was professionally cordial, with participants exchanging brief pleasantries despite their known policy disagreements. Carson, the moderator, gathered the guests for a brief pre-show conversation about the format. Tonight's discussion will focus on 3 main areas: infrastructure investment, workforce development, and international trade policy, he explained. We want to explore substantive differences in approach rather than political positioning. Our viewers are particularly interested in specific policy mechanisms and their real-world impacts. The participants nodded in agreement. Palin mentioned she was looking forward to a good discussion about why conservative approaches deliver better results, while Crockett expressed hope that they could identify areas where different perspectives might actually complement each other for more effective solutions. As the final minutes before broadcast ticked down, the studio took on the focused energy characteristic of live television. Lighting technicians made final adjustments, producers confirmed timing cues, and the participants reviewed their opening statements. A production assistant counted down 3 minutes to air. What no one anticipated was how quickly the discussion would deviate from its planned substantive focus, or how a single unexpected personal comment would transform the evening from a policy debate into a defining moment in political communication. The broadcast began precisely at 8 p.m. with Carson's measured introduction. Good evening and welcome to American Crossroads. Tonight we bring together diverse perspectives on the economic challenges facing our nation. Our goal is to move beyond talking points to understand the concrete policy differences that shape our national debate. The first segment, focused on infrastructure investment, proceeded largely as planned. Dr. Maxwell outlined economic multiplier effects of targeted infrastructure spending, while Secretary Richardson discussed historical precedents from previous administrations. Palin emphasized private sector alternatives and concerns about government inefficiency, while Crockett detailed specific mechanisms for ensuring accountability in public projects. The conversation, while reflecting clear ideological differences, maintained a focus on substantive policy questions rather than political personalities. Viewers commenting on social media noted the refreshing depth of the discussion compared to typical political programming. It was during the transition to the workforce development segment that the tenor of the conversation began to shift. As Carson introduced the topic, Palin interjected with increasing frequency, often speaking over Crockett's points rather than waiting for her turn. The interruptions, initially subtle, became more pronounced as the segment progressed. What viewers at home couldn't see were the off-camera dynamics developing in the studio. Production staff later reported noticing Palin's growing frustration as Crockett calmly responded to each interjection with specific policy details and statistical evidence, maintaining her composure despite the increasingly confrontational approach. By the time the discussion turned to international trade policy, approximately 40 minutes into the broadcast, the contrast in communication styles had become apparent to viewers. Palin's comments included more generalized statements about America First principles and common sense approaches, while Crockett consistently referenced specific trade agreements, tariff structures, and economic analyses. It was at this juncture that the conversation took its unexpected turn into personal territory, a moment that would transform what might have been a forgettable policy discussion into a viral exchange that would be analyzed in communication classes and political science courses for years to come. The fundamental issue with progressive trade policies, Palin was saying, her voice taking on the sharper edge familiar to those who had followed her career, is that they prioritize global interests over American workers. When Representative Crockett talks about multilateral agreements and regulatory harmonization, what she's really describing is surrendering American sovereignty to international organizations. Carson, attempting to maintain the policy focus, interjected, "Representative Crockett, would you like to respond to the characterization of your position?" "I appreciate the opportunity to clarify," Crockett began. "My support for certain multilateral frameworks isn't about surrendering sovereignty, but about creating predictable environments where American businesses can compete effectively. For example, the Midwestern manufacturing sector gained approximately 28,000 jobs under the revised North American Trade Framework, specifically because it created more level competitive conditions with—" "That's the kind of elite Washington doublespeak that Americans are tired of hearing," Palin interrupted, her tone growing more dismissive. "These fancy economic terms and cherry-picked statistics don't reflect the reality that hardworking Americans experience when their jobs disappear overseas." Crockett maintained her composed demeanor. "I understand your concern about relatable language, Governor. These aren't just statistics to me. They represent real people with real livelihoods. When I visit manufacturing plants in my district, workers don't ask for simplified talking points. They ask for honest assessments of how policy changes will affect their specific industries." At this point, Carson attempted to redirect the conversation. "Let's focus on the specific mechanism differences between your approaches. Secretary Richardson, how would you... I think what Americans really want, Palin interrupted again, is straight talk from people who understand their values, not lectures from ivory tower academics or career politicians who've never met a payroll. Dr. Maxwell raised an eyebrow at this characterization, but remained silent. Carson tried again. Let's ensure everyone has an opportunity to present their perspective. Representative Crockett, you were outlining specific employment impacts. The problem with Representative Crockett's approach, Palin continued, seemingly determined to maintain her line of attack, is that it's all theory and no practical experience. Maybe if Congresswoman Crockett spent less time on those designer outfits and flashy hairstyles and more time understanding basic economics, she'd realize why her policies are hurting everyday Americans. The studio fell silent. The camera operators exchanged glances. Dr. Maxwell's eyes widened slightly. Secretary Richardson looked down at his notes, visibly uncomfortable. Carson shifted in his chair, clearly taken aback by the personal nature of the comment. The camera cut to Crockett, who remained perfectly still for a moment, her expression revealing nothing as she processed the unexpected pivot to her appearance. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was actually only about 3 seconds. Then, with remarkable composure, Crockett leaned slightly toward her microphone. Governor Palin, I'm here to discuss policy solutions for American families, not to have my appearance critiqued. But since you've opened that door, let me walk through it properly. Her voice remained even, neither raised in anger nor diminished in defense. I grew up watching my mother work 2 jobs to support our family after my father was injured on his construction site. She taught me that competence doesn't come from how you look, but from how thoroughly you prepare and how honestly you engage with the challenges before you. The clothes I wear and how I style my hair have absolutely nothing to do with my understanding of economic policy or my commitment to the people I represent. Crockett paused briefly, her gaze steady and direct. When we resort to commenting on appearances rather than engaging with ideas, we diminish the quality of our democratic discourse. The American people deserve better than that from their public servants. They deserve substantive debates about policies that affect their daily lives. She glanced down at her notes, then continued with remarkable poise. Now, regarding the specific trade mechanisms we were discussing, the data from the Manufacturing Extension Partnership shows that targeted export assistance programs have helped small and medium-sized American manufacturers increase their market share in regions where formal trade agreements have established consistent regulatory frameworks. I'm happy to share these reports with you, Governor, as I believe they address your concern about protecting American workers in a global economy. The studio remained silent for a moment after she finished speaking. Carson, recovering his professional demeanor, nodded slightly. Thank you, Representative Crockett. Let's return to the policy substance. Secretary Richardson, your perspective on these trade mechanisms? As Richardson began speaking, the camera briefly caught Palin's expression, a mixture of surprise and what some viewers later described as grudging respect. The personal attack had failed to provoke the emotional response it seemed designed to elicit. Instead, it had highlighted the contrast between approaches to political dialogue that the evening's discussion had already begun to reveal. In the control room, the executive producer whispered to an assistant, "That's going to be the clip everyone's talking about tomorrow." The remainder of the segment proceeded with noticeably less interruption from Palin. The discussion returned to policy specifics, with each participant contributing perspectives on trade enforcement mechanisms, worker retraining programs, and tariff strategies. Approximately 15 minutes after the personal comment, during a discussion of supply chain resilience, Palin made an unexpected pivot. I think it's important to acknowledge that passionate advocates can have fundamental disagreements without questioning each other's intentions or personal choices, she said, not quite making eye contact with Crockett. My concern has always been ensuring that policies actually deliver results for hardworking Americans, not just sound good in theory. While not a direct apology, the comment represented a noticeable shift in tone. Crockett nodded slightly in acknowledgement, but kept her response focused on the policy discussion at hand, detailing specific supply chain vulnerabilities identified during recent congressional hearings. As the segment concluded, and Carson prepared to transition to the final topic, viewers at home were already reacting strongly across social media platforms. The exchange had struck a chord, particularly among women who recognized the familiar dynamic of having their appearance critiqued rather than their ideas engaged. Comments flooded, in praising Crockett's composure and substantive response. In homes across America, the moment resonated with unexpected power. In a Birmingham living room, a mother pointed to the screen and told her teenage daughter, "That's how you respond to people who try to diminish you." In a retirement community in Arizona, a group watching the broadcast engaged in an animated discussion about decorum in public discourse. In a college dormitory common room, students of various political persuasions found themselves in rare agreement about the effectiveness of Crockett's response. As the final segment began, focusing on domestic manufacturing policy, the dynamic between the participants had subtly but unmistakably shifted. The conversation became more measured, with less interruption and more substantive engagement with competing ideas. Whether consciously or not, Palin had adopted a more policy-focused approach, while Crockett maintained the evidence-based style she had demonstrated throughout. By the time Carson delivered his closing remarks, thanking the participants for a wide-ranging discussion of critical economic policies, the broadcast had delivered something more significant than its producers had anticipated. Not just policy perspectives, but a vivid illustration of contrasting approaches to public discourse itself. As the on-air light dimmed and the broadcast concluded, the studio remained unusually quiet. The typical post-show bustle was subdued as crew members and production staff processed what they had witnessed. Something meaningful had occurred, a moment that transcended the usual political theater to reveal something essential about dignity, composure, and the power of responding to personal attacks with substantive engagement. What none of the participants yet realized was how quickly and powerfully this exchange would resonate beyond the immediate broadcast, or how it would shape perceptions of both women in the days and weeks to come. Within hours of the broadcast's conclusion, the exchange between Palin and Crockett had gone viral across multiple platforms. Clips of the moment, particularly Crockett's measured response to the personal comment, were being shared at an extraordinary rate. By midnight, major news websites had featured the exchange, with headlines emphasizing the contrast between the personal attack and the policy-focused response. In the CNN studio, as participants gathered their materials and removed their microphones, the atmosphere remained charged with unspoken tension. Production staff moved efficiently but quietly, many still processing what they had witnessed. Carson approached Crockett as she collected her notes. "That was an impressive demonstration of composure." "Representative," he said quietly. "Thank you, Robert," she replied. "I believe viewers tune in for substance, not spectacle. I try to keep that in mind, especially in difficult moments." Across the studio, Palin was engaged in conversation with her aide, her expression suggesting a recognition that the exchange had not gone as she might have intended. As Crockett passed nearby on her way to the exit, Palin looked up briefly, their eyes meeting for a moment. No words were exchanged, but observers noted a subtle nod from Palin, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge, however reluctantly, the effectiveness of Crockett's response. By the following morning, the exchange had transcended political media to become a cultural moment. Morning shows across networks featured the clip, with commentators from across the political spectrum analyzing both the attack and the response. The Washington Post published an analysis titled, "When Personal Becomes Political, the Crockett Response," examining how the exchange reflected broader patterns in political discourse, particularly for women in public life. Communications experts praised the specific elements of Crockett's response: her refusal to respond with a reciprocal personal attack, her brief acknowledgement of the inappropriate comment before pivoting back to substance, and her maintenance of composure throughout. Georgetown University professor of political communication, Dr. James Harrington, observed in an NPR interview, "What made Representative Crockett's response so effective was that she neither ignored the attack nor allowed it to derail the substantive discussion. She acknowledged it, contextualized it within broader concerns about political discourse, and then deliberately returned to policy substance. Social media engagement with the exchange continued to grow exponentially. The hashtag #WalkThroughItProperly began trending, with women in various professional fields sharing their own experiences of having their appearance critiqued rather than their ideas engaged. By midday, the clip had been viewed more than 7 million times across platforms. Particularly notable was the cross-ideological nature of the response. While partisan reactions generally reflected expected alignments, a significant number of conservatives expressed disappointment with Palin's approach and appreciation for Crockett's substantive focus. A prominent conservative commentator tweeted, "We win on policy substance, not personal attacks." Crockett's response was a masterclass in maintaining dignity while staying focused on the issues that matter to Americans. At 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Crockett held a previously scheduled press conference regarding infrastructure legislation. Inevitably, reporters asked about the previous night's exchange. Her response maintained the same measured approach. Last night's discussion contained many substantive policy disagreements that deserve attention and debate. I believe Americans are best served when we focus on the merits of competing approaches rather than personal characteristics. My office has prepared a detailed analysis of the specific trade and manufacturing proposals discussed during the broadcast, which we're making available to anyone interested in the policy substance. This consistent return to substantive policy matters rather than personal conflict only enhanced the growing public appreciation for her approach. Political strategists noted that Crockett had accomplished something rare in contemporary politics, transforming what might have been a negative moment into an opportunity to demonstrate character and substantive focus without appearing defensive or retaliatory. By late afternoon, the exchange had prompted broader discussions about standards in political discourse. Several editorial boards published pieces calling for a return to policy-focused debate rather than personal attacks. The Boston Globe's editorial, titled "The Dignity Deficit in American Politics," specifically cited the exchange as emblematic of contrasting approaches to public service. For Sarah Palin, the aftermath proved more challenging. Initial reactions from her traditional supporters were mixed, with some defending her straight-talk approach, while others expressed discomfort with the personal nature of the comment. By evening, as the overwhelmingly positive response to Crockett's handling of the situation became clear, Palin's team recognized the need for a more direct response. At 7:30 p.m., Palin released a statement through her social media accounts. "Politics is a passionate arena where strong disagreements about America's future are natural and necessary." Last night's discussion with Representative Crockett reflected those strong differences in vision and policy. While I maintain my fundamental concerns about progressive economic approaches, I respect the Congresswoman's commitment to her principles and recognize that focusing on personal appearance rather than policy substance doesn't advance the important debates Americans deserve. I look forward to future opportunities to discuss our competing visions for America's prosperity on their merits. The statement, while not a direct apology, represented a significant acknowledgement that the personal comment had been inappropriate. Media analysts noted that Palin's response reflected a recognition of the overwhelmingly positive public reaction to Crockett's handling of the situation. Throughout this period, Crockett herself maintained a focus on legislative work rather than the media narrative surrounding the exchange. Her office released the Promised Policy Analysis, a 12-page document detailing specific mechanisms for integrating workforce development with trade policy. This substantive contribution further reinforced her image as a serious policymaker rather than a political personality. By evening news broadcasts, the exchange had evolved from a viral moment to a case study in effective communication during conflict. Communication professors reported planning to incorporate the exchange into their curriculum. A Yale lecturer on public discourse announced a special session analyzing the rhetorical strategies employed by both participants and their effectiveness. Beyond professional analysis, the exchange resonated with everyday Americans in unexpected ways. Parents reported using the clip as a teaching tool for their children about responding to personal attacks with dignity. Workplace professionals shared it as an example of maintaining composure under pressure. Even high school debate coaches incorporated it into their instruction on effective rebuttal techniques. What had begun as a typical political exchange had transformed into something more significant, a moment that transcended partisan divisions to highlight fundamental questions about character, dignity, and substance in public discourse. As one commentator observed, in an era often characterized by the loudest voices and the most inflammatory statements capturing attention, Crockett demonstrated that composure and substance can be more powerful than conflict and spectacle. The following day, invitations for Crockett to appear on major programs flooded her office. Her communications director, prioritizing substance over celebrity, selectively accepted those that promised focus on policy matters rather than the personal exchange. This disciplined approach further reinforced her reputation for seriousness of purpose. Among political professionals, the exchange became a reference point for effective crisis management. A Democratic strategist noted in a political newsletter, Crockett turned what could have been a negative moment into a defining one by refusing to be baited into the personal realm. She didn't just survive an attack, she transformed it into an opportunity to demonstrate exactly the qualities the attack attempted to undermine: her seriousness, preparation, and focus on substance. 10 days after the broadcast, CNN's ratings analysis revealed that the segment featuring the exchange had been viewed online more than any other political content in the network's history, surpassing even presidential debate clips. This unprecedented engagement reflected something significant about the public's hunger for dignity in political discourse, a counterpoint to the assumption that conflict and confrontation are necessary drivers of audience attention. For Representative Crockett, perhaps the most meaningful responses came not from media figures or political professionals, but from ordinary constituents. A letter from a retired teacher in her district expressed what many were feeling. "Thank you for showing my granddaughters what strength really looks like, not responding to meanness with more meanness, but standing firm in your dignity and keeping focused on what really matters." In the months following the CNN roundtable, the exchange between Palin and Crockett continued to resonate far beyond typical political news cycles. What might have been a fleeting moment of conflict had instead become a cultural reference point for discussions about dignity, substance, and effective communication in public life. 3 weeks after the broadcast, Georgetown University's Institute for Political Communication hosted a symposium titled "Beyond Gotcha: Restoring Substance to Political Discourse." The event featured communications experts, political strategists, and media analysts examining how Crockett's response had challenged conventional wisdom about effective political communication. For decades, political consultants have operated under the assumption that passionate conflict drives engagement, noted Dr. Eleanor Sandberg, the Institute's director. Representative Crockett's approach demonstrated that dignity and substance can be equally compelling to viewers. This challenges fundamental assumptions about what audiences value in political discourse. Media organizations began examining their own coverage approaches in response to public reaction. Several major networks implemented new editorial guidelines emphasizing policy substance over personal conflict in political programming. A prominent cable news executive acknowledged in an industry publication, "The extraordinary public response to that exchange has caused us to reevaluate our assumptions about what viewers want from political coverage." For Sarah Palin, the incident prompted a period of reflection and recalibration. While maintaining her distinctive political voice and conservative principles, she noticeably shifted her approach in subsequent appearances to focus more consistently on policy critiques rather than personal characterizations. In a Fox News interview 6 weeks after the CNN roundtable, she explicitly addressed this evolution. "I've always been passionate about fighting for everyday Americans against elite policies that hurt working families. That passion sometimes comes across strongly, but I've been reminded that focusing on the substance of these policies is more effective than focusing on the people proposing them. Americans deserve serious debates about serious issues." This acknowledgement, while subtle, represented a significant evolution for a political figure whose brand had long been associated with combative rhetoric and personal critiques of opponents. For Representative Crockett, the aftermath brought both opportunity and challenge. The viral nature of the exchange had significantly elevated her national profile, leading to increased media requests and speaking invitations. Her office maintained a disciplined approach, accepting opportunities that allowed for substantive policy discussion while declining those that seemed focused primarily on the personal dynamics of the CNN exchange. 60 days after the broadcast, Crockett delivered a keynote address at the National Press Club focused on substance over spectacle, restoring purpose to political communication. The speech expanded on themes implicit in her response to Palin, arguing for a political discourse that prioritized policy impact over performative conflict. When we reduce complex policy disagreements to personal attributes or tribal affiliations, she noted, we not only diminish the quality of our democratic process, but also distract from the real-world consequences of the decisions we make as public servants. Americans deserving comprehensive health care, good jobs, safe communities, and quality education don't benefit from political theater. They benefit from serious engagement with substantive solutions. The speech received coverage across major news outlets, with analysis noting how Crockett had transformed a potentially negative incident into a platform for advocating a more substantive approach to political communication. Beyond media and political circles, the exchange continued to resonate in educational contexts. University communications departments incorporated the video into curriculum on effective crisis response and maintaining message discipline under pressure. Leadership consultants used it to illustrate principles of emotional intelligence and dignity under fire. Even high school civics teachers reported showing the exchange to students as an example of effective democratic discourse. 90 days after the broadcast, CNN released a documentary titled Substance Matters: Reimagining Political Discourse, featuring interviews with communications experts, political figures from both parties, and media analysts, examining how political communication shapes democratic participation. The Palin-Crockett exchange served as a central case study, with experts analyzing both the personal comment and Crockett's measured response. What made Representative Crockett's response so powerful wasn't just what she said, but how she said it, observed media psychologist Dr. Michael Richardson in the documentary. By maintaining her composure and refusing to reciprocate the personal attack, she demonstrated a kind of leadership that transcends partisan divisions, one rooted in dignity rather than dominance. The documentary also explored broader patterns in political media, questioning industry assumptions about conflict as a necessary driver of audience engagement. Ratings analysis revealed that segments featuring substantive policy discussions had begun outperforming those centered on personal conflict or partisan performance, a shift that challenged long-standing programming approaches. For everyday Americans, particularly women in professional contexts, the exchange had sparked important conversations about navigating situations where appearance becomes a focus rather than substance. Professional development seminars and women's leadership conferences incorporated discussion of the Crockett approach to handling inappropriate personal comments while maintaining professional focus. 6 months after the broadcast, the exchange had established a lasting place in American political culture. References to walking through it properly entered the lexicon as shorthand for maintaining dignity while addressing inappropriate behavior. Political commentators across the spectrum acknowledged a subtle but meaningful shift in expectations for political discourse, a greater emphasis on substantive engagement and a decreased tolerance for purely personal attacks. For Representative Crockett, perhaps the most meaningful legacy emerged in her legislative work rather than her media profile. The increased national recognition had enhanced her ability to build coalitions around policy initiatives, particularly in workforce development and economic opportunity. Colleagues noted her effectiveness in focusing legislative discussions on substantive impact rather than political positioning. Representative Crockett has always been a serious legislator focused on policy details, observed a senior committee colleague. What's changed since that CNN moment is how people receive her message. There's a deeper appreciation for her substantive approach and a recognition that it represents something increasingly valuable in our political landscape. 1 year after the broadcast, academic researchers published the first comprehensive study of the exchange's impact on political communication norms. The analysis, appearing in the Journal of Political Communication, documented measurable changes in both media coverage approaches and audience expectations following the viral response to Crockett's handling of the personal attack. The data suggests a significant shift in viewer engagement patterns, the researchers noted. Content featuring substantive policy discussion with respectful disagreement now consistently generates higher engagement metrics than content featuring personal attacks or performative conflict. This represents a meaningful evolution in what audiences